Playbook. I'm Debasish Mishra, and with me is my fellow host, Mike Park, and we're super excited. Thank you for joining us. Hopefully you saw our first episode. For those of you who watched it, thank you so much. We really appreciate both the likes and the comments and definitely all the views that we managed to get. And I especially appreciated all the folks that mentioned how much Mike talks about Clippy.
I gotta love Clippy. So I want that to be the theme. It'll be the theme of the show. Clippy should be our mascot, right?
I'm pretty sure we'll run into an issue if we try to make Clippy the mascot. But Clippy is holding Mike hostage, and he's threatened essentially to continue to talk about Clippy. And I think the only way to solve that is if you like, subscribe, or share, so that we can put an end to it. So if you want Mike to continue talking about Clippy, don't do any of those things. But please like, subscribe, or share, and we can put an end to Clippy's holding Mike hostage.
He's making a comeback.
All right, with that, let's get into it. It's been a really busy month since we last spoke. What have you learned in the past month?
So, I mean, I've got to get my head straight here because I've got DeepSeek in my mindset, but I think the pace of change is really how fast we're going and really not moving the ball that much farther down the road. Just in the past month, with DeepSeek coming out and all this hoopla around it, like, oh my God, it's changing everything. What's changed? And I mean, cost, right? It's cheaper, no doubt, but the capabilities are still there, and the pace of change is what I've noticed. I think also the window of how fast these big announcements come, it's getting exhausting, right? It's hard to keep up with. I was just looking at, OpenAI just released their model, and now here comes DeepSeek, and it's like, it's revolutionary. Well, we had some revolutionary 3 months ago. I'm getting exhausted. I don't know about you, but that's what I've noticed this month. I'm getting old, I think, is what I'm trying to say. All this change is hard to keep up with. What about you? What caught you in this past month?
I have to agree with you. I think just there's been a lot of announcements. We'll definitely talk about DeepSeek. But I think for me, I spent a lot of time actually diving into agentic AI over the past month. And it's been really interesting. I'm the person who said, I think Satya Nadella is wrong. I think I've learned a lot more about his perspective. I still think he's wrong. I don't think SAS goes away. But in terms of seeing what these agents do, and I think the people who are really driving some of this have really understood both what AI is capable of as well as its limitations. So I was looking at a multi-agent use case, and it was fascinating because basically, it's just a bunch of small tools doing really, really small things. And then it's being orchestrated by agents. And then these AI agents who are making choices about what tools it can use. And then, and these are agents who are being managed by yet another AI. So super fascinating, I think, because what I saw is that the AIs can't actually handle a lot. But if you give it a very narrow and focused task, then it can actually improve the reliability of what it's delivering. And so, it's almost like a microservices-based approach in terms of thinking about what do you want this thing to do? And now you're orchestrating these microservices together to actually deliver an application functionality. So, I'm exploring it right now, and I think I'm super excited about what its possibilities are, especially on the project we're working on together. But that's been my big takeaway.
So let me add into this. What's new is old again, right? So that the buzzword a couple of years ago was composability, right? When we talked about APIs and microservices and how to be agile and scalable, it was we want to be composable. No different here, right? I think you're spot on. And when we let these AI components be laser focused and do very specific things, we then can stitch them together to make them do what we wanted to do. But we get that agility and scalability as well. So I think it's a great approach to do it. Now, it's hard. It can be a challenge. But I think, like you talked about, you and I have experienced this as we try to build out capabilities. These AIs are good. They ain't great. So how do we make them great? We have other AIs. Check them. And start putting rules around them and then stitch that together to be a solution. You're not going to build the magic bullet AI thing and go, there it goes. I think you have to do the Lego building block. I do so like use my hands, but build the blocks together to make solutions. And I think composability is still a valid term in the space. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what really struck me is that it's not magic. You still have to design it. You have to put thoughtfulness into it. Otherwise, it's like if you leave all of that to the AI, it really is not going to know how to do it. And so it's super fascinating. I think more to come on it as we learn more, but that's the piece. I still think Satya's wrong. I think we're still in a SaaS world for a long time, but I do think this notion of agentic AI has merit and value.
Well, I think they'll be complementary, right? I agree with you. I don't think SaaS is going away, but I can see where SaaS will get help from agentic components where that rote over and over again work. We've had these form fillers and these drop down type ahead. Those are great. Now backfill that with AI where you increase the accuracy. Now I can move faster. So I think augmentation, not replacement, is really what's going to happen. So
yeah, absolutely. So let's talk about DeepSeek now, right? Because obviously that came in, and all our predictions from the first episode just got blown out of the water. It seemed like NVIDIA, your big winner for 25, lost $1 trillion literally like overnight. What do you think, man?
I mean, I look at that and I thought, well, DeepSeek, everyone was talking about, OpenAI they must be threatened. They must be threatened. I'm thinking, OpenAI, what about NVIDIA? The DeepSeek model uses 2,000 estimated GPUs from NVIDIA to do their work, whereas Facebook's estimated to use 100,000, right? Chips. Something. And I think what happened is it shows what necessity can do. We forced that organization, that government, China, we're not going to get these chips. All right, let's find a way around them. And they found a way to do and scale it out instead of up and get it at mass. So my takeaway is you don't think OpenAI and Mistral and Gemini, they'll pick up on this. They're going to go, got it, quick pivot, right?
100%. I think obviously there was a ton of hype around this. And I think a lot of people who were freaked out because I think the industry as a whole had not really thought about scalability. And I mean, you and I have seen this in the data world, right? Essentially, they were using brute force processing, right? If you think about all the old analytic models and things like that, where they're basically going through every row and every column instead of indexing, right? Which would be a better, more scalable approach to thinking about analytics and search, right? I think that's really the innovation that DeepSeek brought. I mean, whatever the reason for it, they understood that brute force is a horrible way to process things. And they came up with a way that was much more scalable by basically not trying to digest all of the model and really just figuring out how to chunk the processing in a way that was so much more efficient. And I think, anytime you drive that efficiency by an order of magnitude, right? Like that's a massive thing.
Well, that's how we got here, right? So when these neural networks came along and the transformer model came along, that's when large language models exploded because they introduced transformers capability. Now we've got this reinforcement learning capability. So it's just progress, right? It's not putting anyone, because I love people say, OpenAI is going to be out of business. No, they're not. This is how we adjust and move on. They're a multi-billion-dollar company that started as open source, right? So they'll be okay. They're going to be okay.
100%. Everybody's going to basically adopt DeepSeek's approach and build their own model, right?
Yep.
And everyone's going to reap the benefit of that cost. And like for folks that are worried about, DeepSeek being the tool of the Chinese government and all your data is going to get sucked over there, that's probably true. Like, I wouldn't necessarily recommend anybody. I don't know. Well, obviously there's so much noise and news that's going on. Like, what do you convey to your CIOs? Like, hey, Mike, there's all this DeepSeek stuff going on. What do I do here? Like, how do I deal with this?
The way I actually enjoy it, because it allows me to reinforce, this is why we're not bleeding edge, right? This is why we want to be as close to cutting edge, but we don't want to be out too far. Let it bake. We're not ready for those capabilities, so it's okay. Take a breath. We need to get our plan in place and how we're going to, as you can see, this stuff is still baking itself up. I thought it was interesting they ran the test, localization. If they ran it in Korea, DeepSeek, they got this answer. If they ran it in China, they got that answer. Was that by design or was that by the content that it consumed? Don't know. But it's still, that's the point. We don't know. So let this stuff formalize, stabilize. We've got enough work in front of us in the next 18 months to get ourselves ready, and we'll bring pieces of it in. But this is why we're not rushing ahead. I think this, and I think you made a mention in our last meeting that you thought the big takeaway would be someone would get too far out over their skis on some of this technology and get caught. This is just reinforcement that we don't want to be that company. Right? We don't want to be one of those companies. Let it bake. Let it see what's going to happen. That's the approach I've been taking. So,
Yeah, I think that's a sound approach anytime we're looking at technology, right?
yeah.
It's that hype cycle, right? Right at the beginning, everything is super hyped up. Everyone says it's the next greatest thing. And then really it's not until you let it bake, as you mentioned, before you start to see where the real value is.
Remember blockchain. Blockchain is my poster child, right? Because a couple of years ago, my world got consumed with blockchain. And the number of times I had to tell C-suite executives, we don't need blockchain. It's not, here's what it does, and here it does have a purpose, but it's not for us. We might have a need, but not now. So just patience. That's the best message I can give. Don't jump into this stuff. Let it bake.
Yeah, absolutely. You take the example of Meta, right, which went down heavy on that virtual reality, right? So much
the
renamed the
metaverse,
company.
Yeah.
And, I think that virtual reality hasn't happened yet, right? Still virtual.
And it still might, it still might come, but it's going to be in a different version of what, we've talked about this before. We keep seeing these introductions of technology that are going to change the world. I've been around a long time. You've been around. I remember when personal computers came out, they go, oh, we'll never do away with paper. We'll never have any more paper. I got just as much paper today as I did 30 years ago. I still have, it didn't change. Video conferencing. Oh, once we get nobody wants to talk on video conferencing. I have all these voice-enabled technologies. They're great, but they're not that life-changing. It is hype and then falls back down to, we hit that, the trough of disillusionment, and then we bounce back up to about the middle. And I think we're still in the height, but we're going to drop down where people are going to get a little exhaustion on this stuff. We're going to say, yeah, it works. And then somewhere we'll level off where it's an enabling, it's moving us forward, but it's not that life-changing that it's going to be that much different. I think that's my position.
Yeah. So, it makes me think of a really important topic, as there's so much noise, right? There's so much information, there's so much change, there's so many technologies. And when you look at what people are looking for from their IT leadership, I've been looking at role descriptions for IT leaders, and it's surprising to me how much the expectation is on a detailed or in-depth level of technology understanding, right? Like they're expecting, the CIO to know how to code, which is fascinating to me, because I don't know, it's not quite the same job. You know what I mean? When you think about an IT leader, like what are the things that you want from your IT leader?
Yeah, I mean, what I want from my IT leader is enablement. I want him to listen. I want him to knock down barriers. I want him to, be that servant leader role. I was taught back in the day when I was going to school, there was theory X and theory Y. A theory X manager was, my employees are lazy. I got to watch out for them. I got to keep an eye on. I got to make sure they do the right work. And I know more than they do, so I know how to code and you code. And I'm going to be honest, there was times in my career I might have managed that way because I could code. I could do the work. I knew the technology. But I'm more now on the theory Y side of it. Look, I'm here to help my employees. I'm here to make the team better. What can I do to let them maximize their ability to execute? Because my job is as a leader, would be to knock down the barriers and help them. I don't need to be the technical specialist anymore. And that's been hard for me as someone who came up the tech stack to say, look, I do not know this tech. I was on a call earlier today with a very sharp developer, and I said, look, he goes, well, I know, Mike, you probably don't. I go, no, stop. You've got the pen. You're leading the way. I'm here to get the barriers out of the way and I bounce ideas. I know some of it, but I don't need to be in depth, right? And I think that is a misconception. You're not going to find those unicorns that can do, I'm a great leader and I can a heads down developer and I know all about integration patterns. That's a unicorn. You're not going to find that. So I go look for it. Why not find in a leadership role that leader that can help get all that capability out of the technical people and maximize the ability?
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I've been a chief architect, I've been a CTO, and I am obviously not a coder by background. I've had people say, I don't understand how you can be successful if you don't know how to do that. And to your point, I think it's kind of weird if I did know how to do that, partially because I think I wouldn't have been good at my job. But on top of that, it's like I would be micromanaging a bunch of people who work for me, right? Like essentially saying, I don't trust your code. And so I need to go look at it to be sure that I feel good about it. And I think that's
Well,
just,
I mean, yeah, I don't mean to cut you off, but I mean, I remember that's how you and I met, right? I mean, we were in the roles. You were the enterprise architect. I was a solution architect. And you had the vision, and my job was the execution. And I think that's where we worked well together, because I didn't want, you got that, I got this. And the number of times I remember us having those meetings, you saying to me, look, I don't know what you're talking, I assume you got it. And I said, look, I can make this happen. I assume you're telling me it's the right way he's having. And I think that was synergistic for us to say we can get work done together. Right? So that's what I look for. A partner, I look for a leader or a team member that makes me better at what I do, not can replace what I do. So
yeah, I think certainly I think from a leader perspective, you have to know how to pick good technical talent. And I think we should come back to how do you know somebody is good at technology?
Yeah, that's hard.
But I think to your point, it's about enablement. You and I both know, like in technology, there are 100 ways to solve a problem, right? You can do it cheaper, you can do it faster, you can do it better, but you can't have all three necessarily. And if you leave it to the technical people, they may not pick the right answer. And so you're really looking for the leader to say, hey, what's important to us? What do we prioritize? Because the person on the ground who's executing is not necessarily going to know what that is. That's what the role of the leader is.
So I used to use the term the benevolent dictator. We need a benevolent dictator. So quick, silly little story, right? This is back when we were building I was building websites for people, right? So I'm early on. I'm in this bank, and a bunch of people sitting around. They're talking about were they going to use a green background or a blue background, because the green was important to them, but blue was also right. There, hour-long conversation into this. Finally the bank president looks at me and goes, Mike, you've been quiet. You're not usually that quiet. Why? Don't you have an opinion on this? I go, well, here's my opinion. It doesn't matter to me, and you're paying me by the hour, so I think this is a wonderful conversation. You should keep going. And he looked at me, he kind of laughed. He goes, you're right. It's blue. We're done. Move on. So he became that benevolent dictator when I put him in the context of how are you valuing this? That's your job as the leader to say, look, it's not right and wrong. It's different. And I'm going to help make the decision that we're going to lean left and right. Right? We're going to go this way instead of that way. I got to get agreement. Tell me if there's I'm going to break laws or, lose $1 million. But as long as it's not that critical and we're all in consensus, drive consensus, let's support everybody on making that decision. And then I always say to them, and then circle back and make sure that you give feedback. Say, did we still make the right decision? That's what a good leader does, right? Did we still make the right decision? I know you wanted to go the other way. Maybe it's time to revisit what you wanted to do. They get the voices heard, I think, is important too.
Yeah. There are many misconceptions, I think, in the enterprise about technology. One of them being certainly that the leader of your technology has to understand the technology in depth, right? Like it just changes too often. And I think there are too many other responsibilities. But what are some of the other misconceptions you think are going on? What's the biggest misconception you think?
The number one thing I see is the business partners looking at it and saying, IT moves too slow. The tech's too slow. We can't leverage the tech. You guys are too slow. And to a certain extent, that might be right. But I think they lose the perspective of why it's slow. It's not plug it in, turn it on, hit the button and go. There's work that needs to be done in order to have it work. So I used to use the phrase, I go, yeah, short-term gain, long-term pain. We're trying to keep you out of that, right? We want to make sure. Now, we need to move faster. The IT groups, we need to get that out of the way. But I think there's a misconception that technology is. I think these cloud providers have made it look like, how hard is it? Yada yada yada. You push the button, you got no. That yada 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 is where all the work needs to be done, right? So that is a misconception that it's not technology. It's getting the business people to be able to put their processes into rules, not guidelines. You've heard me say this for years. Always is cheap. Sometimes is expensive. And whenever I would walk into a business and they would go, well, sometimes we do this, and sometimes they go, you're never going to get technology to work for you. You've got to be able to make tough business decisions to get the technology to work. So that to me is one of the misconceptions I see. It's not a technical problem a lot of times. It's a business process problem that I see.
Yeah, I think that's spot on, right? Like the number of organizations I've worked with where They just think technology is the silver bullet to whatever the problem is,
Yeah.
right? Like, I have this issue. I'm going to apply some of this technology, some Salesforce, and now my life is going to be better.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
I bought Salesforce. How come my sales haven't gone up, right? Well, I bought it. Well, we got to use it. You got to change your business processes maybe. So change management is a critical component of, are you changing the business process? It's, there used to have the old thing about, we bought the car, then they push the car instead of, getting rid of the horse. Don't get in the car, learn how to drive a car because you got a new capability now. So are you ready for the change management? And again, like I said, those aren't technical issues. Those are business process issues, in my opinion.
Yeah. Well, and I think this is the piece that for me, in terms of the misconception, is understanding that the enterprise is an ecosystem, right? It's fascinating to me, little people respect or understand that it is an ecosystem, right? There are many things that are going on. It's like, trying to open a subway station in a city. Like, you're going to impact a bunch of things because there's already streets and buildings and pipes and right. Like, there are a lot of things to think about. And the piece that always is interesting to me about IT is how little respect there is for design. Whether you think about that from an ecosystem perspective, or you think about even at a individual system level, right? Like, I think agile methodology famously, like, one of their principles is, no documentation, right? Like, or less documentation over code.
Less documentation. Not no documentation, less documentation.
Yeah. But I think that it's almost singularly unique amongst industries, right? You can't imagine another industry that would basically deliver a product without design. You would never get into an airplane that didn't have design done. Your clothes are designed, right? Somebody thinks about, like, how does it come together, and then how does it get manufactured? Your automobiles are that way, right? Houses are built that way. Like, would you hire a builder without an architectural blueprint, right? But it's amazing to me. I was an architect for 15 years. That job was an influence job. It was never that architecture was baked into the development life cycle, right? It was never part of it. Implementation, and to the detriment of many organizations. I got to work on a lot of stuff where I'm untangling this mess because nobody ever thought about it. And I think it's probably the piece that surprises me the most, I think, about technology is the absence of respect or value for design.
I'll validate that with the fact that 2 or 3 years ago, I went and got a postgraduate degree in design thinking, because I thought it was such a critical component. And I ran my own shop for 25 years where we built custom apps. And yeah, I used to always say the design is critical. How many times we delivered software that just didn't get used because it wasn't intuitive, it didn't make sense, they didn't understand. If I have to train someone how to use my software, I think I missed the mark, right? I needed to be functional. I worked on a big multi-million-dollar project one time. We had this initial release that went out, and we're all sitting around waiting for the first bug reports to come in. And the first bug report came in and said, when I hit F9, nothing happens. I'm like, okay, I need more detail. What did you think F9 was supposed to happen? And it turned out it was an old, if you remember, Lotus Notes, right? Now I go to Clippy, now I go to Lotus Notes, but, my old legacy tools. But it was a distributed piece. And what F9 did, it synced all the databases up. We didn't know what they were talking. We didn't need to do that anymore, right? But we didn't educate the users on what their expectations were and how these things work. Those requirements are going to show themselves. They're better to get them at the beginning than when you deploy the code, right? To say that, wait, this doesn't work the way I want it to. As someone I made my living doing that. I got really good at listening to what the customer wanted, but making sure I also gave them what they needed for today and tomorrow. And design, to me, design was always understanding what's the business value, what's the business process, the business tools aside. When you push that button, what do you think is going to happen? I need to know that. And that's where I think where that design gap brings those consequences.
Yeah. I used to work for a big software company, and, I remember this project vividly because at that company, there were 5 major systems that handled information about customers and partners, but these were all run out of separate groups. And so, each one built their own data their own database for that customer or partner, and they overlap, right? Because they had lots of interactions with these folks. And the data was so out of sync because these groups didn't talk to each other. They were perfect silos, that for the CEO to get information on the top 50 customers was an exercise, a manual exercise for some team that would take them a month. So if the CEO was doing a customer visit, he had to give 30-day notice to his team to be able to pull together all of the information across the systems. All because you couldn't get agreement on something as simple as, well, what is the definition of a customer, right? And how do we singularly identify them across all of our processes and all of our core systems? And just again, that absence of, hey, if I'm going to build a system, maybe I should understand how I'm handling data right across all of my processes.
Well, it's that enterprise view. Do you have an enterprise view? So I worked for a company where I think it was that software company you worked for, you're talking about, came in and said, do you know how much money we spend with you? And we said, no. And they go, well, we do. Because we didn't. We could, that's a typical problem, right? To be able to answer that, how do I bring my data all together? But again, I think this is why I think when I hear digital transformation as the key buzzword, really to me, what I'm hearing is we need enterprise architecture. We need to bring and look at a holistic view of how these puzzle pieces, we talked about composability. We talked about agentic AI. It's the enterprise needs to be composable so we can make it scale, so we can make it pivot. And having that design methodology and a framework to solution in is a critical part of it that a lot of times I think gets glazed over. And I think it's critically important.
Yeah. And I think just not even from a functional perspective, but just even a cost perspective, right? Like, I spent a lot of time arguing with teams, especially internal development teams, about, okay, if we build it wrong, but we'll just iterate and, we'll iterate and make it better. I'm like, okay, well, that's great, but that's going to take you time and money, where if you spent just a little bit of time doing design, you don't have to do it over. I'm like, it's one thing to rebuild and iterate when that's an app that makes you money, right? So if you're earning revenue off of it, then you can justify it because you've got revenue coming in to cover your cost of development. But on an internal app where, you're a cost center, you can't afford to continue to build over and over and over and over.
No. And this is how IT gets that bad reputation where the business thinks we're too slow and we don't function right, because they are making they're trying to sometimes guess. Like, look, when I had my development team back in the day, I told them there's two ways to code. There's the team's way and the wrong way. And they're not, right and wrong in terms of that's bad code. It's you're not helping us make money. We're all here in a company to make money, so all code the same way. Now, if you have a better way, come convince the team, and then we'll all do it the new way. But if you're coding that way and he's coding that way and she's coding that way, that's chaos. And that's just, we can't scale, we can't change, we've lost our agility. Standardization always is cheap, sometimes expensive. I've been saying it forever. I am a firm believer in it. And I always say, sometimes it's important, right? We want to free up that capacity. So you put that good design work into your solution, so you enable the business with your tools that they need. Now you freed up their capacity to go work on what the business value truly is, right? What is it the business wants to do? They're not spending the time on, 5 different storage patterns and networking patterns and API patterns. That's all standard. Capacity is now freed up to go work on how do we beat the competition. That's where you need to put the capacity, right? So
100%. We've been talking about all these changes that have been going on in the industry. I'd be curious, where do you think it's all going to go? If you play it out 5 years from now, what's it going to be like? Are we flying to work in our little Jetsons, jetpacks?
So you think about how time is collapsing, right? How quick this stuff comes along. And we've talked about this before. If Benjamin Franklin or Alan Turing came in today, how awestruck would they be? So how awestruck are we going to be 5 years from now, right? When we look forward and we say, oh my God, look what you can do now. Look, did you know the comedian Nate Bargatze? He's the Tennessee. He's got that great routine. He talks about, if I went back, like say in the time machine in the 1920s, I don't think I'd make a difference. He goes, they have cell phones back in the future. Well, how do they work? Well, I don't know. They have video. How do you do? I don't know how to do this stuff for you, right? I think that's where I'm going to be 5 years from now. I think I'm plugged into technology today, but I think I'm going to start to lose the perspective when I look at it's changing so fast. How do you keep up with it? The pace of change. When I see big. I know I talked a little about this last time. I got to get into the quantum computing. I think is going to be the big changers. We talk about scalability a lot, right? What they've done here, I think it was. I'm not sure why. I had to go back and look the organization, but they just did data teleportation, right? Where they were able to move data instantaneously because of the entanglement features of the quantum machines. And that now is allowing them to now scale out because they're struggling with building these chips with all the qubits on them. And the more qubits you add, the more noise and error correction you get. Well, now, because they can do this through entanglement, this teleportation, now they can have multiple chips work together and then run a scale. I think that is going to accelerate. Quantum computing will not replace standard what we have today in terms of, I think it's going to augment it dramatically. So I think we're going to see quicker medical discoveries come along, problem solving, legal change, all of these things are going to be accelerated at a rate that you and I don't think will be comfortable with, to be honest with you. So
interesting. I think you're really optimistic on it. Well, if I go back to what we were talking about at the beginning, I think that certainly these changes are big. I think they're bleeding edge, right? And it takes a little bit of time for things to bake. So in a 5-year time horizon, I think you're right. I think it's going to basically advance considerably, but I think it's not going to be fully baked yet where the application side of that's going to come through yet. But I do think, this AI stuff, I think we'll get past the hype. We'll have our massive disaster and people will be like, oh, maybe I shouldn't jump into bleeding edge technology just yet. But I do think some of the baked principles of things where it's clear what it can do well versus not. I think the automation pieces are going to come through. I think people are going to say, okay, my AI can't handle this really abstract, vague, really super complex thing. But if I give it some really small things and then I orchestrate it together, I think that's going to hit. I think what's going to happen potentially is that through no code platforms. And I think I'm seeing a lot of that where you can now do some of this orchestration without code, which is super exciting for me because now I don't need you.
You don't need me, right? So here's the thing. This is a great topic. You're always going to need a guy like me. I don't care what anybody says because I've used some of these. I know, but I've used some of these the GitHub Copilot and help me code. 60% accuracy. I wouldn't put my code in production right coming off of those tools, but people are. I think people are. So that scares me a little bit.
To be clear, I wouldn't trust an AI to code, but in terms of helping orchestrate very unique functions where it's an API call to something that reliably does something, I think that's starting to get interesting. And then I think what's going to start to happen is people are going to be able to package those orchestrations as services that organizations can buy.
I think you're already seeing that. There's a whole, I want to dive more into this and do a little more research, but I think we might talk about this before. There's a whole emerging market using the blockchain and the cryptocurrencies and these agentic AI components where they're putting cryptocurrency behind these agents to have them go do stuff where they're generating revenue. So you're investing in it. There's a whole financial industry that's cropping up that I didn't even know existed until I started researching the other day. And I want to dive more into that. So that might be a topic we can talk at Future State about. Do you know what's going on here? Because I'm just starting to touch it, and it is a lot deeper than I thought it was. It is very interesting. Taking what you're talking about and putting it's out there already where people they're monetizing that capability already. And it is really intriguing.
Definitely. Well, I think a great conversation as always. I hope you enjoyed it as well. Certainly let us know in the comments. Tell us if you agree. Certainly tell us if we're wrong. We're interested in your perspective. Please, of course, like, subscribe, share it if you thought it was interesting. And we hope we'll hear from you and see you at the next one.